Katie Johnson walked through the long metal halls of Kepler Station. The Space Academy floated in orbit around a distant planet. Ships from many different worlds docked here every day. Students from dozens of alien species lived and studied together. In this huge building among the stars, Katie was 19 years old and came from Earth. She had brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and wore the dark blue uniform of a cadet. Her boots made soft sounds on the metal floor as she carried her training gear to the gymnasium. Today was combat training day, and she was not looking forward to it. Humans had only joined the Galactic Alliance 3 years ago. Most aliens still thought of them as the new kids who did not belong. They were smaller than most other species and did not have natural weapons like claws or thick skin. Many aliens wondered why humans were even allowed in the military academy. The gymnasium was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that Katie could barely see it. Different sections were marked off for different types of training. Some areas had climbing walls that went up for hundreds of feet. Others had obstacle courses designed for aliens who could fly or jump incredible distances. Katie found her assigned training group near the center of the room. 20 cadets stood in a circle around their instructor. Half of them were human, but the other half came from all over the galaxy. She recognized most of her classmates by now. There was Jake Miller, her roommate and best friend. He came from Texas and always made jokes to keep everyone calm. Next to him stood 3 Zentarians with their large eyes that could see in all directions at once. Their blue skin shimmered under the bright lights. On the other side of the circle, 2 vegan. Cadets whispered to each other without moving their mouths. They could speak directly into each other's minds, which made the human students feel left out sometimes. Near them, an Andromedan cadet stood perfectly still like a statue. His people were known for never showing emotion, but the cadet who drew everyone's attention was Zethkar. He belonged to a species called the Krathen, and he was built like a living tank. Standing over 8 feet tall, his body was covered in natural armor that looked like thick gray plates. His arms were as thick as tree trunks, and his hands ended in fingers that could crush metal. The Krathen were famous throughout the galaxy as warriors. Their home planet was a harsh world where only the strong survived. They had been fighting wars among the stars for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. Zithkar came from a family of soldiers and had been training to fight. Since he could walk, Commander Lisa Parker stepped into the center of the circle. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and scars on her hands from her years in the Earth Navy. Her voice was strong and clear when she spoke. "Today we practice hand-to-hand combat," she announced. "You will work in pairs. The goal is not to hurt each other, but to learn. Remember that every species fights differently. Learn from those differences." Katie hoped she would be paired with Jake or one of the other humans. But when Commander Parker started calling out names, Katie heard something that made her stomach drop. "Johnson and Zethkar," the commander said. The Krathen warrior looked down at Katie from his great height. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes seemed to say that this would be a waste of his time. Several other cadets stepped back to give them more room. Even Jake looked worried. "Begin with basic defensive moves," Commander Parker called out. "Show me what you have learned." Zethkar moved forward slowly, like a mountain coming to life. He was not trying to hurt Katie, but even his gentle movements were powerful, enough to knock down a normal person. Katie watched his feet and hands carefully. She had studied recordings of Krathen fighting styles and knew they relied on strength and direct attacks. When Zethkar reached for her, Katie did something unexpected. Instead of trying to block his massive arm, she stepped to the side and used his own motion against him. She grabbed his wrist and pulled while pushing against his elbow. Physics did the rest of the work. The giant warrior stumbled forward, off balance. Katie quickly moved behind him and placed her hand on his back, right where his armor plates came together. With a small push, she sent him face first toward the training mat. Zethkar caught himself before falling, but the message was clear. The small human had used his own strength to control him. Whispers started among the watching cadets. This was not supposed to happen. A Krathan warrior stood up slowly and turned around. His face now showed anger. In his culture, being outfought by someone smaller was a deep shame. His people believed that might made right, and this tiny human had just made him look weak in front of everyone. Again, he growled in his deep voice. This time, Zethkar did not hold back as much. He came at Katie faster and with more force. But Katie had been studying his movements. She knew he would try to grab her with both hands this time. She waited until the last second, then dropped low and swept her leg behind his knee. At the same time, she pushed against his chest. Zethkar's own forward motion combined with her technique sent him crashing to the mat with a loud thud that echoed through the gymnasium. The room went completely silent. Every eye was on the small human girl standing calmly over the fallen Krathan warrior. Katie offered her hand to help Zethkar up, but he knocked it away and jumped to his feet. His face was dark with rage now. In the Krathan culture, what Katie had done was not just embarrassing, it was insulting. She had made him look like a child in front of warriors from other worlds. His pride was hurt worse than his body. "You think you are clever, little human?" He snarled. "You think your tricks make you strong?" Katie did not answer. She simply took her defensive position again and waited. This made Zethkar even angrier. He wanted her to be afraid, to show some emotion. But Katie's face remained calm and focused. That was when Zethkar made his biggest mistake. Instead of using a training move, he let his anger take control. He drew back his massive arm and struck Katie across the face with the back of his hand. The sound of the impact rang out like a gunshot. Katie's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. Several human cadets gasped in shock. The aliens in the room expected to see the small human fall to the ground crying. But Katie Johnson did not fall. She did not cry. She did not even make a sound. Instead, she slowly turned her head back to face Zethkar. A thin line of blood ran from her nose down to her lip. Her left cheek was already starting to turn red where his knuckles had hit, but her eyes were still calm and focused. "That was a mistake," she said quietly. The gymnasium was so silent that everyone could hear her breathing. Zethkar stared down at her in confusion. He had hit her hard enough to knock out most beings in the galaxy. How was she still standing? How was she still so calm? Katie wiped the blood from her nose with the back of her hand. She never took her eyes off the Krathan warrior. Around them, cadets from a dozen different worlds watched and waited to see what would happen next. None of them were prepared for what Katie Johnson would do. Katie Johnson stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Blood dripped from her nose onto the training mat below. Her left cheek was swelling where Zethkar's massive fist had connected, but her breathing remained steady and controlled. The Krathan warrior waited for her to collapse or run away crying. In his experience, smaller beings always broke when faced with superior strength. He had fought creatures from many worlds, and they all reacted the same way when hurt. They either became afraid or they became angry and stupid. But Katie did neither. Instead, she took one calculated step forward. Her movement was smooth and deliberate, like a machine that had been programmed for a specific task. Zethkar's eyes widened slightly. This was not the reaction he expected. Katie planted her left foot firmly on the ground and shifted her weight. Her right hand came up slowly, fingers curled into a perfect fist. She had learned this punch in a basic self-defense class back on Earth when she was 12 years old. Her instructor had been very clear about the proper technique. "Keep your thumb outside your fingers," the old Marine had said. "Aim for the target, not where you think it will be. Use your whole body, not just your arm, and always follow through." Katie followed through. Her fist traveled upward in a perfect arc. She put her shoulder into it, rotating her hips for maximum power. Her knuckles connected with the underside of Zethkar's jaw, with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. The impact sent a shock wave through the Krathen's entire body. His head snapped back violently. His eyes rolled up until only the whites showed. His massive arms went limp at his sides. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the 8-foot-tall warrior swayed on his feet like a tree in a strong wind. Then, gravity took over. Zethkar crashed to the training mat with a thunderous boom that shook the entire gymnasium. His armor plates rattled against each other as he hit the ground. A small cloud of dust rose up around his motionless body. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Not one of the 40 beings in the room made a sound. Even the Zentarians, who usually chattered constantly among themselves, stood, frozen with their mouths open. Katie looked down at the unconscious Krathen for a moment. Then she calmly adjusted her uniform and wiped the remaining blood from her nose with her sleeve. Her expression never changed from the same focused calm she had shown throughout the entire encounter. She looked around the circle of shocked faces surrounding her. Aliens who had never seen a human fight before stared at her like she was some kind of mythical creature. Even the Andromedans, famous for their emotional control, appeared disturbed by what they had just witnessed. "Instructor Parker," Katie called out in the same even tone she might use to ask about homework. "Cadet Zethkar appears to require medical attention. Should I continue with the exercise or escort him to the medical bay?" Commander Parker had seen combat on 6 different worlds during her 20 years in the Earth Navy. She had watched soldiers do impossible things under pressure and had thought nothing could surprise her anymore. But watching this 19-year-old girl knock out a Krathen warrior and then ask about continuing the lesson left her speechless for several seconds. "Class dismissed," Parker finally managed to say. "Everyone return to your quarters. Johnson, stay behind." The other cadets began to file out of the gymnasium, but they moved slowly and kept looking back at Katie and the fallen Krathen. Jake Miller started to approach his friend, but Commander Parker waved him away. The human cadets left reluctantly, whispering among themselves. The alien students were having very different reactions. The 3 Zentarians huddled together, their large eyes darting between Katie and Zethkar. They spoke in rapid clicks and whistles that the translation devices could not keep up with. The vegan telepaths stood perfectly still, but Katie could sense they were having an intense mental conversation. Their faces showed confusion and something that might have been fear. One of the Andromedan cadets approached Commander Parker. His species was known for their logical thinking and lack of emotion, which made his next words even more significant. "Commander," he said in his flat, mechanical voice, "we require clarification." The human cadet absorbed a combat strike that should have rendered her unconscious. She then delivered a counterattack that disabled a Krathen warrior. "Our database indicates this should not be possible based on human physical specifications." Before Parker could answer, a medical team arrived. Dr. Amy Clark, the station's human physician, rushed over with 2 Altarian medics. The Altarians were tall, thin beings with 4 arms that made them excellent at medical procedures. Dr. Clark knelt beside Zethkar and checked his vital signs. "He's alive but unconscious," she reported. "Looks like a dislocated jaw and possible concussion. We need to get him to the medical bay immediately." As the medics loaded the massive Krathen onto an anti-gravity stretcher, Dr. Clark turned to examine Katie. "Let me look at that nose," she said. "I'm fine. Katie replied. "It's not broken." "Let me be the judge of that," Dr. Clark said firmly. She gently touched Katie's nose and cheek, checking for serious damage. "You're going to have a nasty bruise, but everything seems intact. How do you feel? Any dizziness? Nausea?" "No, ma'am. I feel normal." Dr. Clark stared at her for a moment. She had treated hundreds of patients who had been hit by Crothan warriors. Most of them required surgery and weeks of recovery time. This girl was standing there, talking like nothing had happened. "We'll run some scans just to be safe," the doctor said. "But first, I need to ask, where did you learn to punch like that?" "Basic self-defense class," Katie answered. "Everyone takes it in high school, back home." This answer seemed to disturb the remaining alien cadets even more. The Andromedan, who had spoken earlier, stepped forward again. "You are saying that all human children learn combat techniques of this effectiveness?" he asked. "Not all," Katie said, "but most learn something. My mom made me take classes after some kids were bullying my little brother. She said it was important to know how to protect yourself and others." Commander Parker finally found her voice again. "Johnson, we need to talk. The rest of you, return to your quarters immediately. And not a word about this to anyone until we sort things out." The alien cadets left, but they moved like people in a dream. Katie could hear them whispering in their own languages as they walked away. She had a feeling that keeping this quiet was going to be impossible. When they were alone, Commander Parker looked at Katie with a mixture of pride and concern. As a human, she was impressed by the girl's skill and composure. As an instructor, she worried about the diplomatic consequences. "That was either the best or worst thing you could have done," Parker said. "Zethkar struck you first, so self-defense rules apply. But knocking out a Crothan warrior on your first week here is going to cause problems." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Katie said. "I just reacted. He hit me, and I needed to make sure he couldn't do it again." "Don't apologize for defending yourself," Parker said quickly, "but we need to be prepared for questions. The Crothan take their warrior culture very seriously. Having one of their best young fighters defeated by a human cadet is going to be complicated." Katie nodded. She understood that she had just created a diplomatic incident, but she also knew she had done the right thing. Zethkar had crossed a line when he struck her in anger instead of training properly. "What happens next?" she asked. Commander Parker looked toward the door where the medics had taken Zethkar. "Next, we see how the Crothan delegation reacts when they find out their star warrior was knocked unconscious by a 19-year-old human girl who learned to fight in high school." Katie touched her swollen cheek gently. It hurt, but not as much as her pride would have hurt if she had let Zethkar's attack go unanswered. She had made her choice, and now she would face whatever consequences came from it. But as she walked toward the medical bay for her examination, Katie had no idea that her simple act of self-defense was about to change how the entire galaxy viewed the human race. Word traveled fast through Kepler Station. By dinner time, every cadet, instructor, and staff member had heard some version of what happened in the gymnasium. The stories grew bigger with each telling. Some said the human girl had broken the Crethans jaw with her bare hands. Others claimed she had used some kind of secret human weapon. A few insisted that she must have been using illegal enhancement drugs. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something impossible had happened. Katie sat in the dining hall with Jake Miller and 2 other human cadets. The enormous room was filled with beings from dozens of worlds, but she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Aliens pointed at her and whispered in languages she did not recognize. "This is crazy," Jake said quietly. "I've gotten 23 questions about you in the past hour. Everyone wants to know how you did it." "I just hit him," Katie said, taking a bite of her synthetic protein meal. "It's not that complicated." Maybe not for you, said Danny Green, another human cadet. But I've been talking to some of the alien students. They think we've been lying about how strong humans really are. Katie looked around the dining hall. At a table near the windows, 3 Krathen cadets sat in complete silence. They kept glancing in her direction with expressions of confusion and anger. She had never seen Krathen look uncertain about anything before. Across the room, a group of Centaurians were having an animated discussion. Their translator devices were working overtime as they gestured wildly with their 4 arms. Every few seconds, one of them would look toward Katie's table. The Centaurians are scared, said Maria Santos, the 4th human at their table. She was studying alien psychology and could read their body language better than most. They keep talking about human hidden capabilities and asking if we're really as peaceful as we claim. Jake laughed nervously. Peace? Katie knocked out an 8-foot-tall warrior with one punch. That doesn't sound very peaceful. He hit me first, Katie said calmly. I just made sure he couldn't do it again. This simple statement seemed to disturb her friends even more than the original incident. They stared at her like she had just said something profound instead of obvious. Before anyone could respond, Commander Parker appeared at their table. She looked tired and stressed. Johnson, you need to come with me, she said. The Academy administration wants to speak with you. Katie followed the commander through the station's corridors to the administrative section. The walls here were covered with flags and symbols from all the member species of the Galactic Alliance. It was meant to represent unity and cooperation between different worlds. They entered a large office where 5 beings sat behind a curved desk. Katie recognized Senior Administrator Veltar, a tall Signon with gray skin and large black eyes. His species was known for their analytical minds and careful decision dash. Making dot next to him sat Admiral Sean Thompson, the highest-ranking human in the Alliance military. She was a stern woman in her 50s, who had fought in the last Earth War, before first contact with alien species. The other 3 administrators represented the Andromedan Republic, the Vegan Collective, and the Krathen Empire. Katie noticed that the Krathen representative, a female warrior named Cathara, looked particularly unhappy. Cadet Johnson, Administrator Veltar said in his precise, emotionless voice, please describe the events that occurred during today's training session. Katie told them exactly what happened, leaving nothing out. She explained how Zethkar became frustrated with her fighting style, how he struck her in anger, and how she responded. She spoke clearly and calmly, sticking to the facts. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Admiral Thompson spoke. Cadet Johnson, do you understand the diplomatic implications of what you did? Yes, ma'am. I knocked out a Krathen warrior, which probably made his people angry. It is more complicated than that, Cathara growled. Her voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. Zethkar comes from one of our most honored warrior families. He has been training to fight since he could walk. For him to be defeated by a small human child brings shame to his entire bloodline. Katie felt a flash of anger at being called a child, but she kept her voice level. He struck me in anger during a training exercise. That was against the rules. I defended myself. How? The Andromedan representative asked. Our analysis suggests that Krathen physiology should make them immune to attacks from beings of your size and strength. I aimed for a weak spot, Katie said, and I used proper technique. This answer seemed to frustrate them even more. Veltar leaned forward in his chair. Cadet Johnson, our medical team has examined Zethkar. His jaw was not simply bruised, it was completely dislocated and required surgical repair. The force required for such an injury should be beyond human capabilities. Katie shrugged. I guess it wasn't. Admiral Thompson had been watching this exchange with growing interest. As a human, she understood something that the aliens were missing. Administrator Veltar, with your permission, I would like to ask Cadet Johnson a few questions. The Signin nodded, and Thompson turned to Katie. Johnson, what was your state of mind when Zethkar struck you? I was annoyed that he broke the rules, ma'am, and I needed to make sure he couldn't hit me again. Were you afraid? Katie thought about this for a moment. Not really. I was focused on the problem that needed to be solved. And what problem was that? How to stop a bigger, stronger opponent without getting hurt worse than I already was. Admiral Thompson smiled. Slightly. She was beginning to understand what had really happened in that gymnasium. Tell me about your training, Johnson. What combat experience do you have? Just basic self-defense classes in high school, ma'am, and the academy training we've done so far. The alien administrators exchanged confused looks. They had expected to hear about years of intensive military training or some kind of advanced human combat program. That's all? Veltar asked. No specialized warrior education? No family tradition of fighting? No, sir. My dad works in accounting, and my mom teaches elementary school. They just wanted me to know how to protect myself. Cathara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is impossible. No untrained child could defeat a Crothan warrior in single combat. She's not untrained, Admiral Thompson said quietly. She's human. The room fell silent again. Thompson continued, her voice careful and measured. What you witnessed today was not the result of specialized training or hidden weapons. It was a normal human response to a threatening situation. Cadet Johnson assessed the threat, remained calm under pressure, and applied basic techniques to neutralize a larger opponent. But how? The vegan representative asked. Our species requires years of mental conditioning to maintain emotional control during physical conflict. Humans are different, Thompson said. We evolved on a world where quick thinking and adaptive responses were necessary for survival. What you call emotional control is just Tuesday for us. Katie listened to this conversation with growing understanding. The aliens weren't upset because she had broken some rule or used unfair tactics. They were upset because she had done something they believed was impossible. Veltar looked directly at Katie. Cadet Johnson, in your opinion, was your response today unusual by human standards? Katie considered the question carefully. Not really, sir. Most people I know would have done something similar if they were attacked. This answer seemed to disturb the alien administrators more than anything else she had said. They began talking among themselves in their native languages, their translator devices struggling to keep up. Finally, Veltar called for order. This session is concluded for now. Cadet Johnson, you are restricted to quarters pending further investigation. Admiral Thompson, we will need a full report on human combat capabilities and psychological profiles. As Katie left the office, she could hear the administrators arguing behind the closed door. She had a feeling that her simple act of self-defense was going to have consequences far beyond anything she had imagined. But as she walked back to her quarters, Katie felt no regret. Zethkar had learned an important lesson about respecting his training partners. And maybe the rest of the galaxy was about to learn something important about humans too. 3 days passed before Katie was allowed to leave her quarters. During that time, teams of investigators went through every record they could find about human capabilities, training methods, and psychological profiles. What they discovered shocked the entire Galactic Alliance. Dr. Ross Martin, the Academy's human psychologist, was called in to explain their findings to a panel of alien scientists and military leaders. The meeting took place in the station's largest conference room, with representatives from 12 different species attending either in person or through holographic projection. The investigation has revealed something extraordinary, Dr. Martin began, his voice calm and professional. Cadet Johnson's response was not exceptional by human standards. It was completely normal. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembled aliens. The Krathan delegate, General Vorthak, slammed his massive fist on the table. "Impossible," he roared. "My son has trained for 15 years. He is one of our finest young warriors. A human child cannot simply knock him unconscious with basic techniques." "But she did," Dr. Martin replied. "And here's what you need to understand. Katie Johnson has no formal military training beyond what every human child receives. Her response was instinctive, based on basic self-defense principles that most humans learn as teenagers." He activated a holographic display showing human brain scans and psychological profiles. Humans evolved on a planet where survival required quick adaptation to threats. Our brains are wired differently than most species. A Xantarian scientist leaned forward, her large eyes focused intently on the data. "Explain these differences, please." "First, humans can experience strong emotions while maintaining rational thought processes. When Katie was struck, she felt anger and pain, but these emotions didn't overwhelm her decision-making abilities. Instead, they provided motivation for her response." The Andromedan representative, known for his species' legendary emotional control, seemed puzzled. "Our people require years of mental training to achieve such discipline. How do humans develop this naturally?" "Because for humans, it isn't discipline," Dr. Martin explained. "It's survival instinct. On Earth, the humans who could think clearly, while afraid or hurt, were the ones who lived long enough to have children. Over millions of years, this trait became part of what makes us human." He switched to another display showing human physiology. "Second, humans have an unusually high pain tolerance and can function normally while injured. Katie absorbed a blow. That would incapacitate most beings, but her body's natural systems allowed her to continue fighting effectively." Dr. Amy Clark, who had treated both Katie and Zethkar, added her own observations. "When I examined Katie after the incident, her vital signs were completely normal. No elevated stress hormones, no signs of shock or trauma. She was functioning as if nothing had happened. But the most important factor," Dr. Martin continued, "is how humans process threats. Most species either freeze, flee, or enter an uncontrolled rage state when attacked. Humans have a fourth option, controlled aggression." He showed a video of Katie's response, slowed down to show each movement. "Watch how she moves. There's no wasted motion, no hesitation." She assessed Zethkar's size and reach, identified his weak points, and executed a precise counterattack designed to end the threat quickly. The vegan representative, a tall being with pale blue skin, spoke through her translator device. "This level of tactical thinking under stress should require extensive training and mental conditioning." "For your species, yes," Dr. Martin agreed. "But humans instinctively understand concepts like leverage, timing, and momentum. We see patterns and weaknesses automatically. It's how our ancestors survived encounters with much larger predators." General Vorthak had been listening with growing agitation. "You are saying that any human could defeat a trained Krathan warrior?" "Not any human," Dr. Martin replied carefully. "But many could, under the right circumstances. The advantage doesn't come from superior strength or speed. It comes from a different way of thinking about conflict." He pulled up comparative data from multiple species. Most alien combat training focuses on enhancing natural physical abilities, making the strong stronger, the fast faster. Human training focuses on using an opponent's strength against them, finding weaknesses, and applying force precisely where it will do the most damage. A Cygnan observer raised a thin arm. "This suggests that human military capabilities have been significantly underestimated." "That's correct. Admiral Thompson said, speaking for the first time during the presentation. "We've been evaluating humans based on physical specifications that don't account for our psychological and tactical advantages." Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Seth Carr was finally awake and able to speak. His jaw was still wired shut, but he could communicate through a translation device that read his sub-vocalized speech. Dr. Clark sat beside his bed, checking his recovery progress. The massive Krathin warrior looked smaller somehow, as if the encounter with Katie had diminished him in some fundamental way. "I want to understand," he said through the device, his mental voice carrying a tone of confusion and wounded pride. How did she remain so calm? How did she strike with such precision while injured? Dr. Clark had been expecting this question. "Seth Carr, can I ask you something? What did you feel when Katie used your own momentum against you during the training?" "Exercise? Anger," he admitted. "Shame. On my world, to be outfought by someone smaller is a mark of disgrace. And that anger made you strike her outside the rules of the exercise." "Yes, I let emotion control my actions. It was unworthy." Dr. Clark nodded. "That's the difference. When you hit Katie, she felt anger too. But instead of letting it control her, she used it as fuel for clear thinking. The pain and anger didn't cloud her judgment. They sharpened it." Seth Carr was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, he spoke again. "On my world, we believe that strength and honor in battle are the same thing. But she defeated me without losing control, without breaking her code of conduct." "Is this what humans call strength?" "It's one kind of strength," Dr. Clark said. "The ability to do what needs to be done while staying true to your principles, even when you're hurt or angry." Back in the conference room, the alien representatives were struggling to understand the implications of what they had learned. If Katie Johnson represented normal human capabilities, then everything they thought they knew about human military potential was wrong. "This changes everything," the Centaurian scientist said. "If humans can maintain tactical superiority while under physical and emotional stress, their value in combat situations is far greater than we calculated. It also explains some historical anomalies," added the Andromedan. "Human exploration. Teams have shown remarkable survival rates in hostile environments compared to other species. We attributed this to luck or better equipment." "But it wasn't luck," Dr. Martin confirmed. "It was the human ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances while maintaining clear decision-making processes under pressure." General Vorthak stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. For a moment, everyone thought he might explode in anger. Instead, he spoke in a voice filled with something that might have been respect. "I request permission for my son to continue his studies alongside human cadets," he said formally. "If there are things about strength and combat that my people do not understand, then we must learn them." This statement sent shock waves through the assembled delegates. The Krathin had just admitted that they could learn from humans about warfare, something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. "I believe," Dr. Martin said quietly, "that we're about to see some very interesting changes in how different species work together." As the meeting broke up, representatives from various worlds began approaching Admiral Thompson with requests for human instructors, advisors, and exchange programs. What had started as a diplomatic incident was becoming an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation. But the real test would come when Katie Johnson was finally allowed to return to regular classes. How would her fellow cadets react to learning that what they had witnessed was just a normal human response to conflict? 6 months after the incident that would become known throughout the galaxy as the Reboot, Katie Johnson walked through the halls of Kepler Station with a very different reception than before. Cadets from a dozen species nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even asked for her advice on training techniques. The changes had not happened overnight. In the weeks following the investigation, Katie found herself the center of attention in ways that made her uncomfortable. News of her encounter with Zethkar had spread throughout the Galactic Alliance, growing into legend with each retelling. Some stories claimed she had defeated an entire squad of Krathan warriors. Others suggested she was part of a secret human super soldier program. A few extreme versions insisted that all humans were actually advanced combat androids disguised as a peaceful species. But the truth, as Katie kept insisting to anyone who would listen, was much simpler. She was just a normal person who had defended herself when attacked. The fact that this normal response had shocked the galaxy said more about alien assumptions than it did about human capabilities. The real changes began when Zethkar returned to active duty. The massive Krathan warrior had spent weeks in the medical bay, not just healing from his physical injuries, but grappling with the mental impact of what had happened to him. When he finally faced Katie again, it was in the same gymnasium where their confrontation had taken place. But this time, dozens of cadets from multiple species gathered to watch. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Zethkar approached Katie slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he reached her, he did something that no one expected. The 8-foot-tall warrior knelt down on one knee, bringing himself closer to Katie's eye level. "Katie Johnson," he said in his deep, rumbling voice, "I owe you an apology and a debt of honor. I struck you in anger during training, which was wrong by the laws of my people and yours. You responded with justice and precision. I ask your forgiveness and request the honor of learning from you." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft whispers of alien cadets, translating his words for their companions. Katie looked down at the kneeling warrior, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. "Get up, Zethkar," she said simply. "We're training partners, not enemies. If you want to learn human techniques, I'll teach you. But I want to learn Krathan fighting. Styles, too. We can help each other." When Zethkar stood, there was something different in his posture. The rigid pride that had defined him before was still there, but it was tempered by a new kind of wisdom. He had learned that true strength came in many forms. Their first training session together became the foundation for a new approach to combat instruction at the Academy. Instead of species training separately, mixed groups began working together to share techniques and perspectives. Katie found herself appointed an assistant instructor, despite being one of the youngest cadets at the Academy. She taught classes on what the administration called adaptive combat response, the human ability to think clearly under pressure and turn an opponent's advantages into weaknesses. Her students included beings from across the galaxy. Centaurians learned to use their superior vision to spot weak points in armor and technique. Vegas discovered that their telepathic abilities could be combined with physical tactics for devastating effect. Even the emotionally controlled Andromedans found that understanding human combat psychology improved their own fighting effectiveness. But the most dedicated student was Zethkar himself. The Krathan warrior approached human techniques with the same intensity he had once reserved for traditional combat training. He learned to analyze opponents instead of simply overpowering them. He practiced controlling his emotions during combat instead of letting anger drive his actions. The transformation was remarkable. Within 3 months, Zethkar had become one of the most effective fighters at the Academy, combining Krathan strength with human tactical thinking. More importantly, he had become Katie's closest friend and strongest supporter. "You saved my honor," he told her one day after a particularly intense training session. "Not by defeating me, but by showing me that there were things about strength that I did not understand." Their partnership became a symbol of something larger happening throughout the Galactic Alliance. Species that had viewed humans as weak or inferior began requesting human advisors for their military academies. The techniques that Katie had learned in a basic Earth self-defense class were being studied by alien warriors across dozens of worlds. Dr. Ross Martin published a comprehensive study on human combat psychology that became required reading for military leaders throughout the Alliance. The paper, titled Controlled Aggression and Adaptive Response, Understanding Human Combat Effectiveness, revolutionized how different species approached training and tactics. Admiral Thompson was promoted to head a new interspecies military cooperation program. For the first time in galactic history, humans were not just participants in Alliance military operations. They were leaders and teachers. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the various species viewed each other. The incident had forced everyone to examine their assumptions about strength, intelligence, and capability. If humans could be so badly underestimated, what other misconceptions were shaping interspecies relations? Katie found herself invited to speak at military academies throughout the Alliance. Her message was always the same. True strength came not from physical power or natural advantages, but from the ability to adapt, think clearly under pressure, and respond proportionally to threats. Every species has something to teach and something to learn, she would tell her audiences. The Krathen understand honor and discipline. The Centaurians see details that others miss. The Vegas can share thoughts and coordinate perfectly. Humans happen to be good at staying calm when things go wrong. None of these traits make one species better than another. They make us stronger together. On the day Katie graduated from the academy, she stood before an audience that included representatives from 37 different worlds. She had been selected as the first human to receive the Alliance Medal of Honor for interspecies cooperation. In her acceptance speech, she reflected on the day Zethkar had struck her in anger. 6 months ago, a training exercise went wrong. Someone lost their temper, someone got hurt, and someone fought back. It could have been just another minor incident in Academy records. She paused, looking out at the diverse crowd before her. Instead, it became the beginning of something important. We learned that our differences aren't weaknesses to be overcome. They're strengths to be shared. We learned that there are many kinds of power, and the best way to be strong is to help others be strong too. As she left the stage, Katie was approached by a new group of first-year cadets. They came from 6 different species and had been assigned to her as a training group. Among them was a young Krathen who looked remarkably similar to Zethkar. Instructor Johnson, the young Krathen said respectfully, "I am Kethmer, nephew of Zethkar. He has told me much about human fighting techniques. I hope to learn from you as he did." Katie smiled, remembering her own first day at the academy, when she had been nervous about fitting in among so many different species. Welcome to Kepler Station, Cadet Kethmer. Let's start with Lesson 1. The most important technique in any fight is knowing when not to fight at all. As she led her new students toward the gymnasium, Katie reflected on how much had changed. What had begun as a moment of violence between 2 frustrated cadets had become a catalyst for understanding and cooperation throughout the galaxy. Human trait that had proven most valuable was not their ability to fight, but their ability to remain rational and constructive, even in the face of aggression. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond military training. In classrooms, laboratories, and council chambers across dozens of worlds, beings who had never worked together before were discovering the benefits of combining their unique capabilities. The galaxy was becoming a more cooperative place, one conversation and one shared technique at a time. And it had all started with a 19-year-old girl from Earth who had refused to let being hit in the face stop her from doing what needed to be done. As Katie often said when asked about her role in these changes, "I just wanted to make sure he couldn't hit me again. Everything else was just people figuring out how to work together better." Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes a single punch, delivered with perfect technique and perfect timing, can change the way an entire galaxy thinks about strength.